G'day, welcome to Pay It Forward. Now it's been a little while since I designed a mini quilt, so I thought it was time to add to that playlist. So many of you seem to like them, so I've gone with a beautiful little owl, and this project is a really great size for sewing it all up on the machine. So no real little tiny bits there. Great stash buster. So you'll just need your free pattern. I've got that all ready for you, of course. It's in the description box below. I'll put it number 1 in the comments for you as well, so it's nice and easy for you to find. Do make sure you set your printer in its settings to be printing at actual size, so that all of these lovely little pattern pieces are exactly right for you. So let's get busy sewing. So let's start today with our materials and requirements needed to make our little mini quilt. So we are going to begin with our centre panel. Now the measurements for that are in with your templates, and I'm actually using, it's a heavier weight linen cotton for the centre. I'm going for that very natural sort of rustic look to go with my owl. I have interfaced this panel. You do need to do that. It's much easier to work with your applique if you have that one interface, and that's just my fusible woven cotton interfacing there that I've used. So I've got that piece already, and then you're also going to need to cut, you'll find a measurement also for your side panels. Depending on your colour choices, I'm going for very natural colours here. So my side panels are already cut. From there, you'll need your fabric for your top and bottom panels, something that coordinates. We're going to be cutting those as we go. It's much easier to do it as we go. So I've got my green ready, and then you're also going to need your extra fabric, which is for your final outside panels and also for your backing. I'm using a heavier weight fabric again here with this one, so I won't be interfacing my back panel, but I will be interfacing my top and bottom strips. So, and the same goes for my top and bottom strips. These are also interfaced with that same interfacing. We're also going to need just some thin wadding, and I'm just using cotton wadding, preferably fusible. I will make mine fusible by adding some fusible web to that. Again, we're going to cut that piece once we have got the front of our quilt assembled. So then we're going to need our little applique pieces. So we're going to start with, we've got our branch, which is going to sit in there. We have our body section, and all of these pieces have fusible webbing applied. So we've got our little collar, our face piece, then we've got wings, and all of these pieces go on in a particular order, which of course I will show you as we go. Our little wing tips. And I'm making mine in obviously very natural, neutral sorts of colours, but you can imagine you could do some really beautiful, funky little designs here with this one. So we've got our eyes. Now I like to cut those eye pieces in felt. I just think it really makes that little mask stand out really well. And also our eye pieces for the centre. It just makes those eyes a real little feature. I then add a button for that eye. We've got one eye that is closed and one eye that is just a bit of a sleepy eye, and we will have a lid over that one. I've given you a template for the beak. I like to use a little heart button, but you can use just felt and cut it from that template that I've given you. We've got little feet that sit over that branch there. This will be all laid out correctly as we go. We're going to be adding those leaves there, just for a bit more detail, and a little heart if you wish in the middle. So those are all our pattern pieces. You can cut them from felt, fabric, whatever you like, in any colours you like. I'm then going to be adding with this one, I'm going to be adding a little quote, which is Whisper Words of Wisdom. So we've got whisper at the top and words of wisdom at the bottom. You don't have to add that text at all. Or you could possibly add your text by printing it onto some fabric, and then you could cut out those pieces and you could applique those pieces on as well. That's entirely up to you. I'm going to be sewing almost all of this on the machine, so it's very quick and easy, and the subject is big enough for you to do that without any problems, and it really does come up absolutely beautifully. So from here, the only other thing I'm going to add is some rickrack. I'm just adding rickrack because I like that very folksy sort of look with this project, and I'm going to be adding that to my top and bottom strips just to frame that one up there. You don't have to add that. And of course you quilters can go ahead and bind your quilt as you normally would when we get to that point. You can add some little tabs if you like. You can either make them out of fabric, or you can just use a couple of pieces of ribbon to hang your quilt. I would use a clip hanger anyway, so I won't be adding those. So that's it, we're all set. So let's get started with our layout. So now we're ready for our layout. I didn't mention that you will need some kind of pen for transferring your text onto your fabric, and then we can stitch over it. I use a friction pen, which is heat erasable, so I can draw that on, trace that on, and then stitch over it, and then take it to my iron, and those marks will be invisible. So they're very, very handy, and you usually find them. You can get them anywhere. You can get them in your local supermarket, which is where I got mine. I tend to use the black or the dark blue, not the red. The red it's harder to get those marks off afterwards. So we'll be needing that one. So let's start with our first piece, which of course we're going to remove our backing fabric. We've got our iron hot and ready, and we're going to be positioning. Now, position is everything with this little project, and I've got all of your pieces numbered. So number one piece to go on is this tail, and that little tail sits 4.5 centimeters from the very center up to the very central lowest point of that wing tail, the tail section. So just measure your 4.5 centimeters, and I will drop that down just to give you an idea exactly where that is. I will obviously take this and measure it all up perfectly, but just to give you an idea, that's about right. I will make sure that's absolutely centered. I will press that one on. Then my next step will be my branch, and when I press my branch on, I actually just let it overlap the top edge of that tail section, just enough to cover it. You'll see that will all line up on the sides perfectly, and then we press that one into place with a hot iron and a protective cloth as well, and then we're going to press our body section, and that's just going to sit over the top as well, just to cover that little branch section, so that our body is all settled there in place. So it's number one, tail, number two, the branch, and number three, the body. Get those all pressed into place, and then I'm just going to start with my machine applique. So on most of the pieces, I'm going to be using a close little zigzag stitch on the machine, quite narrow and quite close together, almost what you'll call a satin stitch. And I'm going to use a variety of coordinating and also contrasting threads, so that with my light sections, I'm going to be using a darker thread, and in some cases lighter thread on the darker pieces. But I will get those ones pressed into place, and I'll do my first machine stitching, and you can see how that looks. So there we go, that has our first 3 pieces stitched on. You can see how nice that machine stitching comes up, keeps everything beautifully flat. And you can also see that what I've done on that body section, I should have said before, we only stitch the lower edge up a little way because our wings are going to cover that section. So there's a fair bit of overlay in this one, which is why I have it numbered for you. So next pieces to go on are our wings, and they just cover just a little on the base here. You can sit them up a little bit higher there. So you've got a little bit of space, probably just over 1 centimetre from the branch, and then just line that one up to just cover over, and it will extend above that little body piece. Now the way to check that, make sure it's the same on either side. The way to check it is just drop your little collar piece over and make sure that that is actually covering those shoulders, which is what you want. We're not popping that one on now. So you want to make sure that those two wing pieces are nice and even. Get those pressed on, and then you just add your wing tips over the top. And this just gives it an extra little bit of detail. So those are our next pieces, which are 4 and 5. We get those pressed into place and stitched around them the way that you're using your preferred method. Now you can change at any time to a straight machine stitch to do some of the, if you're finding some of the parts a little bit tricky, and you can, of course, you could hand sew the whole thing using a blanket applique stitch, which is what I actually used to do with this pattern years ago. So I'm going to go ahead and get those next pieces on. And there we go, so that has our wings stitched into place there. You can actually probably see I've changed the colours of those wing tips, so don't be afraid to change things up as you go. Step back from your project and have a good look at it to make sure all of those colours are popping, and I thought I needed a bit more pink there. So our next step is to add our collar piece, which actually just sits on the shoulders and just covers that neckline. And then we throw our little heart piece in there, and then our head piece, which just overlaps just a little. You see that it all lines up, and press that front face piece into place, and I will be stitching around these in the same way. The heart piece I'm going to sew with a blanket applique stitch, just because it's a bit of a focal point, and I feel like I can do a better job of that stitching around that little piece by hand. So, and I can use a nice contrasting thread. So now let's have a look at our next step. Our next step is to add our eye pieces, which are our back eye mask pieces. They are number 9, and they are pressed into place. So you see I've already done it, so you can see exactly where that sits. Now there's just a little bit of space between the eyes. It's about 1.5 centimetres, and they just overlap on the edge just a little. Make sure they're turned out a little, follow that little curve line, the same either side. And so now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to machine those ones into place. I'll be using a dark thread so those edges are marked out. Number 10 piece is actually the little beak. So if you're using a button, we can leave that till last. We can stitch that on, but you can see how that will look in place there. But if you are using a piece of felt and using that template, then that is number 10 piece, and you would stitch around it, and I would add a couple of little nostrils as well. So because I'm using a button, I go ahead and then I'm looking at our pieces, which are our little eye circles here. And you can see that I've pressed them into place, and I have stitched around those just with a straight stitch on the machine, because I just want them settled nicely in place. I don't want to draw too much attention to that section there. I just want it nice and neat and tidy. So you can see where they're sitting, just about 1 centimetre from the bottom, and just tilted out slightly. So my next step then is to sew on my button for my eye. You want to pop that one on, position that on, and just check it with your eyelid, because we're going to be stitching that eyelid over the top section of that eye, just so we get that bit of that sleepy look. So make sure you situate that button low enough, and I will stitch that on with a black thread so I get a little bit of a pupil happening there. And I've also taken my gone to the other eye and just drawn just a little closed eye across. Just give it a little curve, and I'm going to go and stitch that one a couple of times back and forth on my machine with the dark brown. So everything's going to be coordinating. So let's get those eyes done. Now that I have those eyes in place, what we're going to do is pop the eyelid over this one. So what I've done is I've taken that eyelid and I've just stitched straight across the edge just to give it a bit of a line so that it mimics the other side. And I've left the tail ends hanging, and I've just applied some clear craft glue on the back, and I can tuck those little thread ends in so they're nicely hidden. And then I'm just going to glue that eyelid straight over the top of that button, and I'm going to make sure that I imitate the same curve. So I will just press that on, I will check it, press it all into place down and over that button so that it's all nicely sealed, and then we're just going to let that dry. Once that glue is dry on that eyelid, you can go ahead and just stitch that top arch into place, and you can do that using your preferred method. Now I've just sewn a blanket applique stitch by hand in a coordinating thread, so it's just nicely settled into place. I will put the link for a blanket applique stitch up the top there for you. It'll help you out with any little other parts that you want to sew with that stitch. So we've got our eyes all done, so let's move on to, we're going to add the feet. And so you'll notice on the feet, on your pattern templates, there are little marks that show you the start of our little claw sections that we stitch in. So I've got them all marked ready, and we're just going to add those. You can see exactly where they sit. They just sit over that branch. You want to mark in your little claw marks and give them a little curve, tucking in like that, and have them sitting right just on the edge there. So we get those pressed into place. Then you can go ahead and stitch around the outside of each of those feet, and then I'll go ahead and I will stitch in a darker thread those little dividers for those claw sections. Our final pieces to go on are our leaves, and they are put on. You can see that I've tucked in, we've got two larger leaves, one goes either side, and I've tucked that top one in nice and close there, about 1/2 centimetre from that wing. Pull it up, and then the little one sits in just below it. Remember that we've got a 5mm seam allowance that's going to be happening here, so we don't want to be too close to that edge. And the same with the other side, that one's well out of the way. And you can see that I've taken my pen and I've just linked up those leaves to that branch on both sides. So when I go and stitch around the leaves, I'm then going to do a straight stitch that joins them up in the green. You could continue on down the centre of the leaf if you like for a bit more detail. And that completes all of our actual applique for this little project. So now we move on to adding our text. If you want to add text, of course you don't have to. You can add anything you like here, or perhaps you can just let it be. I'm going to add text. So I've got my font here, and it's all there for you in your templates, and you'll be able to, it's just a tip, go over it with a thicker pen, and then you can slip it underneath. Now if you don't have a light box, don't worry, just use a nice sunny window pane. What you have to make sure of course, is that you have your text centered, and you also have it low enough to leave a bit of room, remembering that 5mm seam allowance that we're going to have there when we add our borders. So you want a little bit of space between our border and our text. So I've got that one situated just right. Slip it underneath, and you can trace over using a friction pen, or just a heat erasable pen will work really well. Try and use a nice fine one for a better result. You can see also with the words of wisdom down the bottom there that I've kept that nice and close up to the top here, kept it away from that bottom seam there, and made sure that it's the same distance either side and that it's nice and straight. So what you use to stitch, embroidery stitch over your text is entirely up to you. I'm actually using pearl thread. This one is a 5-ply, and I'm only using a single strand. But you could use stranded cotton, just your basic embroidery cotton will work just fine. And what we're going to do is we are just going to start, and basically it's just a linked back stitch that we come in from behind. I'll do my little crosses last, come in from behind, I've got a knot in the end of that thread. I'm going to keep my stitches nice and small, and I'm simply just going to make my way around all of those letters, and it's much quicker than you think once you get going. So back into the hole that you just came out of so that everything is nicely linked. If you're using stranded cotton or embroidery thread, perhaps just use 2 to 3 strands. As I said, this is just a pearl thread, so it is quite thick being in the 5-ply, but I'm using green, so I want it to be quite thick so it's quite readable. So each time all I'm doing is coming up from behind, keeping my stitches nice and even, and going back into that last hole that I just came out of. And it keeps everything flowing nice because it's quite a flowy script. And you should be able to cover that entire text there. You can see that there. That's going to look really lovely once it's all done and pressed. So I'm going to make my way and stitch across all of those words. I'll add my little crosses in. You can do French knots if you'd rather do little spots. You don't have to add these in. I just think it's a nice little effect, and then I will do the bottom ones as well. So that didn't take long, did it? So if you're having trouble stitching over that text at all, it can make it easier by adding another little strip of interfacing behind. Just makes it a little bit more stable. So you can see that I've gone ahead then and I have pressed everything and I have added my side panels, which we have already cut. Now that is a 5mm seam allowance that you can see there. I've stitched and then I've gone ahead and pressed those seams open and flat. And so now we can make our measurements from across the top and the bottom there to create our top and bottom panels, which I've already cut there ready. And of course the width is the same as this one, which is 4.5 centimeters. So now I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to add my top and bottom panels also. I have my first borders stitched on and pressed out. You see all those seams pressed nice and open and flat. And you can see I've gone ahead and added my rickrack trim. If you want to add any kind of trim or braid, now is the time to do it. And I just take it right to the ends and cross them over. So now that you've got this part of your front assembled, you can take your measurements for your side pieces and get those cut. These ones I cut to only 3.5 centimeters wide. I just like it to frame it up with a neater frame. Of course you can change all that, and you very clever quilters, you can go ahead and bind your quilt the way you normally would now. Alternatively, you don't have to add this extra border. I just think it really frames it up and makes it look like a really gorgeous little portrait. So I'm going to go ahead and do the same thing, add my sides first, press those out, cut my top and bottom panels and get those on as well. And there we go. So that gives me my completed quilt front. So our next step is to go ahead and cut our back section, our back panel. So that's easily done by just taking your fabric you've chosen for your back panel. Because I'm going to be showing you an easy way to put a little quilt together, we're just going to sew the back to the front and turn it through. So we won't actually be binding it, but you can go ahead and do that as I said if you want to. So it's just putting right sides together, your fabric right sides together. You can pin that down if you like, and then we're just going to cut out that back piece to perfectly match our completed front. You'll also need to go ahead and cut a piece of wadding, and you want that piece of wadding to be about 1.5 centimeters smaller than your completed front. And we're going to press that fusible wadding onto our back piece when we've got it cut so that it's all ready. I don't take that wadding all the way to the edges because we're going to be turning it through and we don't want that bulk in the seams. So I'm going to get that one cut out and my fusible wadding cut out already. There you go. So I've got my back panel and my wadding. You can see just a little bit smaller than my back panel. That one is fused into place. I've got right sides together with my quilt front to my quilt back, and now I'm just going to stitch right the way around, and we can use a standard 1/4 inch seam allowance here if you like, or 6mm. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave an opening at the base here, just long enough for us to turn that one through. Probably just, you only need to be about 10 to 12 centimeters across there, just to be able to pull that through. So make sure you back and forth when you start and finish, and make your way around that whole outer edge, and just reinforce your corners as you go. Also, just a reminder, if you're going to be adding little tabs for hanging, your little ribbon tabs, they will need to go in now, and they will need to go in folded and in between those 2 layers so that they get incorporated into that seam. I'm not going to be doing that, so I will just stitch right the way around. Once you have that one all stitched up, just go ahead and trim your corners off. That'll just help us push those corners out, and we'll get a nice clean finish. So now all we need to do is pull that one through that bottom opening, turn it through, push all of those seams out, and we will give it a really good press. Now that I've turned that one through, I've gone ahead, as I've pressed all of those seams out, I've just turned that little opening under, and I've taken it to my machine, and I've just top stitched that one in a matching thread. So that's nicely closed there. So now, doesn't it come up wonderful? I absolutely love the look of this one. So now you can go ahead and quilt that one in any way you like. Now usually what I do, because I use them as little wall hangings, I will just stitch in the ditch. So I will just stitch on all of my seam lines of my borders. So right the way around both of those borders, and that will just settle that middle panel into place. You can of course go ahead and quilt as much as you like. You might want to go around the entire outside of your design, or perhaps you want to really quilt up the whole front panel. Entirely up to you. So I'm just going to get my basic border stitching done, and then we'll be completed. There we go, completed little Whisper Words of Wisdom mini quilt. Show me your colours, everybody. I'm very excited to see all of the different colourways that this one's going to be made up in. And also remember that this background here, where I just made it a neutral, of course you could make it any colour you like. You also could quilt as you go, crazy quilt it first, and then add all of your pieces. I'm sure you're all going to do wonderful things with it. The most important thing is that you put your own stamp on it, and that you have a whole lot of fun doing it. So thank you all for watching today. I hope you've enjoyed seeing this little one come together. It really was quite quick and easy, wasn't it? So make sure that you are following me on Instagram, because I've got some special news that I'm sitting on. I'm not literally sitting on it, but I feel like I am, because I'm bursting with it. And that is, I am actually creating a new channel format, and it will be for Masterclass. It will be for Lisa Pay Masterclass. So for all of you who have been itching to make some of those guys behind me on that top shelf there, a lot of those sorts of projects that I do in my one-of-a-kind work, I'm creating a whole new channel that is suitable for all of those sorts of projects. Everything that I've ever done, I'm going to share with you all. So have a think about Masterclass. And it's basically the difference between taking your skill level and stepping it up from craft way up to artist. So, and I'm going to help you do that. So I hope a lot of you are keen, and talk to me in the comments. Tell me what you think. Tell me if you're excited and if you're interested, and we're going to make some great things together. It's just going to be business as usual here at Pay It Forward, though. That's never going to change. Continuing to bring you projects to make that are within everybody's skill level. So follow me on Instagram and watch for those updates. I will be updating you as we go, letting you know when that launch is going to happen. So I've got lots to do. I'm very busy behind the scenes, but I love sharing with you all. So make sure, speaking of sharing, that you join our Facebook page if you haven't already, and come along and share your creations with us too. so we can all see and be encouraged. So everybody stay safe, have a very creative week like mine will be, and make sure that you pay all of that great stuff forward. Until next time, it's Huru from me.